I'm going to deal today with a topic that I actually explored about a month ago in a different article from the City Journal, which I think is part of the Manhattan Institute. And it concerns migration between certain areas of the country based on regulation and taxation. And you might want to ask, why should we care about such a topic? It sounds pretty boring. Nobody really says, "Oh, I'm going to move to Iowa because they have low taxes." I mean, that's kind of on the surface, it's a stupid reason to move anywhere just because of low taxes. But the fact is that people end up doing it for the simple reason that the places where they live don't offer them anything. They need a place where the getting is good, where the prices are low, the taxes are low, or the jobs are there because the taxes are low. That's simply the way it is. And I think we can't be too obsessed with this. I don't think that people really define themselves by their attitude to the market as much as people like me that read a lot about it do. So I don't think people are consciously doing it, which is sort of the reason this article, or it's the rationale behind this article. It's an article that explores that people, even with liberal progressive values, end up often migrating to states where the fiscal policy is the complete opposite. So let's read it. It says, Democratic blue state attitudes may not dominate the national media, but they can't yet tell people where to live. Despite all the hype about a massive back to the city movement and the supposed superiority of ultra-expensive liberal regions, people are increasingly moving to red states and regions as well as to suburbs and exurbs. So I personally have experience with that. Here in Ohio, we have almost every large city. You have this whole phenomenon where people are moving back downtown, and supposedly people are, they're embracing the city life. It's kind of exaggerated, and I can tell you that they're being practically begged to go back and live there. Yeah, the conditions are better there than they were back in 1993 when for example, here the city of Cleveland. I don't like to talk a lot about where I live, but the city of Cleveland was undergoing a complete downturn economically in the 80s, especially in the 90s. There was a slight recovery. It didn't really go so far, and now they're trying to revitalize the downtown area, and it's working, but it's taking a lot of artificial help from nonprofits and the government and whatever, and obviously they're drawing in banks like Quicken, and that's how they revitalized the downtown. But it took a ton of effort, and it didn't really happen organically. So it goes on to say that the blue model, where people move to more dense areas, the ones that I guess they use the blue-red metaphor to explain political affiliation too, along Democratic and Republican lines. They claim that is now just falling apart. That whole premise that people are going to migrate to those zones is nonsense, according to them. And I kind of agree. I remember reading some articles in college about this thing called the creative class, which is basically tons of hipsters and the like, hipsters and yuppies and gay people and whatever, and that's the creative class and whatever. And people were saying that, oh, that's how you revitalize a city. To some extent, sure, but that's what a lot of progressives are complaining about when they talk about gentrification. They're complaining that this pushes out the poor residents of the city and prices them out. So the development of a creative class has not really caused life to be more affordable in these cities. In fact, it's often been the exact opposite. And to some extent, people have abandoned these cities for greener pastures, literally greener pastures. And then The author of this article, the two authors, Kotkin and Cox, they claim this suggests not an intrinsic political calculation, so much as a series of very personal decisions by individuals and families. People move for varied reasons: cheaper homes, lower taxes, employment opportunities, better schools, more value to the paycheck. But the upshot is that they are settling in states that tend to be red, or at least purple, in political coloration. In 2016 alone, the states that supported Donald Trump gained 400,000 domestic migrants from states that supported Hillary Clinton. This came on top of an existing advantage in net domestic red state migration of 1.45 million people from 2010 through 2015. Contrary to popular opinion, these blue state emigres aren't fleeing economically challenged places such as upstate New York or inland California. Mostly they have left the bigger cities, which are the electoral base of the Democratic Party. Metropolitan New York has led the way in out-migration, followed by Los Angeles and Chicago. Since 2003, these metropolitan areas have lost a net 5.5 million domestic migrants to other parts of the country. Even economic boom conditions have failed to reverse this trend. Overall, many big blue core cities now have overall population growths well below the somewhat tepid national average of 0.7%. So who's growing? Last year, all 10 of the top gainers in domestic migration were Sunbelt metropolitan areas: Austin, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Raleigh, Jacksonville, Las Vegas, Charlotte, Orlando, Nashville, Phoenix, and San Antonio. Now, speaking personally, I don't think all of those areas are really conservative strongholds politically, but they're all in states, except maybe Las Vegas, that have very liberal or liberal, I'd say fiscally liberal policies, meaning that they have less regulation, neoliberal policies, or liberal taxation. Not the way we think of liberal as politically. This is a policy where you have less taxes. Okay. You look at Austin and San Antonio. They're both in Texas, which has famously low income tax or no income tax, if I'm not mistaken. Raleigh is in North Carolina. That's the top banking state in the future. Many banks are just moving to North Carolina, including, I think, Bank of America is in Charlotte. Tampa is in Florida, also very low income tax. Jacksonville, same thing. Nashville. These are all red states. And I even have a relative who told me she's a die-in-the-wool Democrat. Huge Hillary Clinton supporter, and she's confessed, people are moving to her state because the taxes are low. And that it's just a fact. People don't want to go somewhere. They don't want to live somewhere where they're going to pay more taxes. So let's continue. Perhaps most surprising, given the almost universal dismissal of their prospects, has been a shift to smaller cities, a more Trump-oriented part of the urban archipelago. Domestic migration has accelerated to cities between 500 and 1 million population, while declining in those above 1 million. So, skipping all this crap, they have a lot of things that are, extraneous. They talk about the Gen Xers. In contrast, hold on. It's freaking out on me. So it's saying political implications. Ultimately, the key political battlegrounds for the future will not be in the blue cities, but in purple suburbs, particularly the booming periphery of major cities in red states. Hold on. This is annoying. I know there's so many. If you look at my videos, the Olive Garden just seems to pop up over and over again. I can assure you I don't get a fucking cent from those assholes. No matter how loud and pervasive the voices emanating from the urban core, or for that matter, ungentrified countryside, Trump won the election by taking a significant 5 percentage point suburban margin nationally, improving on Romney's 2-point edge and by more outside the coastal regions. This contradicts the confident assertions by the New York Times and other establishment choices that Trump would get his clock cleaned in suburbia. It also says, in Michigan, Trump lost Wayne County, including Detroit, by more than 2-1, but captured 4 of the 5 surrounding suburban counties by margins that greatly exceeded that of Michigan native Romney. The pattern was similar in Pennsylvania, where Clinton won in the Philadelphia metropolitan area and Pittsburgh's urban Allegheny County, while Trump was flipping the state with majorities in nearly every other county. So then, the net migration is a very interesting topic. I've heard a lot from people or not from people, but from a site I know that deals with Illinois. Illinois has the worst out-migration in the country. It's basically a state that's heading towards financial collapse. They just had I think they averted it, but they had a massive strike by the state workers, the SEIU and the AFSCME, these two state employee unions, and they both threatened to strike, even though they're the highest paid state employees in the United States. They still were going to strike. So, this is an interesting topic for me. I think people should pay a little more attention to it. I'm not sure that we should concentrate on it that much, but this is an article, Blue Texas ? That Mark Pulliam published last month, or at the end of March. So that's a little more than a month ago, and basically, it's talking about how in Texas there's this massive influx of progressives and basically liberals of all stripes. And in my opinion, this article is just another. It's another very poignant thing for the times. The liberals and the progressives, they like to claim that they could never live, that their way is the only way. You could not survive in an environment like the Republicans or real conservatives, because the Republicans are frauds, as I've said numerous times. But they've claimed numerous times that for there to be a society where there is tolerance, you can't live you can't have the values of a Republican. Of the Republicans, and Texas is the best example of why that's not true. Because if they really believe that, if they believe that you cannot live in such conditions, then they wouldn't be moving to states that have them. And Texas that's a state I've wanted to move to. I don't have, unfortunately, my entire life is here, but I do have a huge attachment to certain things about Texas, culturally and whatnot. My favorite football team is in Texas, but excuse me. This notion that that liberals could not survive in a conservative environment, or that it's so inhospitable and intolerant that it has to be changed, is refuted by the fact that Texas is gaining hundreds of thousands of liberals all the time. Austin, the capital of Texas, is a haven for the hipsters all across the U.S. It has been for decades. Austin was, what's that movie? I think it's called Slackers. I think it's by Richard Linklater. It was produced in the early 90s, and it was about hipster culture in Texas, in Austin. About basically this enclave that was just weird. It was the Portland of the South, and some would say that Portland is the Austin of the West, or the Austin of the Pacific Northwest. This is a city, the capital city of possibly the most conservative state in the union. And it's so liberal that they actually banned Uber because for some reason basically they were trying. It was liberals I mean, they were trying to keep Uber out because it was allegedly less safe than using taxis, and they were not licensed and all that. And Austin is literally ground zero for disproving every liberal narrative that there is. And it says at the end of this article, the one about Blue Texas, it says, if Texas's distinctive culture and thriving economy are to endure, the part-time Texas legislature must come to grips with the fact that progressive vanguard is intent upon undermining the state's conservative core. Texas liberals, out of power for several decades, are highly motivated to effect change with increased taxes, regulation, and spending. Moreover, liberals dominate the major newspapers in Texas, control the University of Texas administration, and exert enormous influence over school districts seeking expanded state funding. Their weapons are identity politics, multiculturalism, and political correctness. Texas's conservative leaders must forcefully resist these corrosive factions. So I think that eventually, I mean, I don't know if I should take this topic as seriously as this author Mark Pulliam does, but yeah, this is a concern, and I'm not going to say it's going to happen in Texas, because I do believe that in the end, it's also conservatives that are moving to conservative areas. So you know, regardless of whether the people that move from the liberal areas to the conservative areas are, you know, they're politically active. A lot of them, that, you know, there's plenty of them that move, that are liberal and move to conservative areas, but also there's a lot of conservatives that they recognize the writing on the wall in liberal areas. You look at cities like Detroit. I'm sure that there's many people that grew up liberal, that grew up in the city of Detroit, that left the city and their politics changed, their values changed. They saw the difference between the ideals and the results of this inane ideology known as liberal progressivism, or liberalism, progressivism, whatever you want to call it. It's been a disaster, and there's no sugarcoating it. And on the other hand, there are cases where what these two authors are talking about happens, and that's what happened in New Hampshire. New Hampshire was once one of the most conservative states in the country in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of social policy. I'm not so sure, but New Hampshire was never this liberal bastion as it is today. It's now considered a blue state. What happened? Because New Hampshire had a more favorable tax structure than Massachusetts, all these retirees or you know, business owners from Massachusetts who were liberal crossed the border to New Hampshire and set up shop there, and they were able to make money, but they decided, you know, this is enough. We're gonna implement liberal policies like we did back in Massachusetts. What happened? According to Mark Levin, basically they ruined New Hampshire. They made it like Massachusetts, and by the way, Massachusetts has consistently been falling apart in terms of its business viability, in terms of its you know, it's just it's not as bad as Connecticut, I hear, but all those New England states are just you know, they're suffocating under liberalism. That's one of the reasons that you have in liberal New England, okay, you have Republican governors in Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, and I think New Hampshire is now, let me see. Okay, so in Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, you have Republican governors. Okay, and in the case of New Hampshire, the state government is also the what do you call them? The state legislature is also controlled by Republicans. On the other hand, their delegation to the Senate and the House is completely Democrat. All four of there's two senators, of course, and then there's 2 representatives, all of them Democrats and all of them women. But the state is run by Republican dudes. So who's exactly doing the work here? You know, who's pulling the weight? This state is basically, I mean, this whole notion that Democratic states are happy is a joke. It's a fucking spoof of reality. There's nothing there for them to claim as a success, because if there was, then why is it that the most liberal part of the United States in terms of values, New England, is virtually under effective control of Republicans in almost every way. The 2 states that are run by Democrats today, in terms of just a state government, which are Connecticut and Rhode Island, are decaying. They're falling apart. I have a friend in Connecticut says all the time that businesses are just fleeing. The growth in the state is falling apart. Connecticut's governor decided to decline to run for re-election. The one in Rhode Island is also not especially liked, but it's Rhode Island, so nobody pays attention there. So my basic point is I brought these articles because I actually do happen to agree with them. A lot of times I bring articles that I think are a bunch of bullshit. But the point is, you implement progressive policies, you'll watch all of your businesses and all the productive people leave. They're not going to want to get fucked on every paycheck. And that's my point. This is Ramon, Bull Like a Leopard. Enjoy our videos, rate our videos, share our videos. It is May 3rd, and tomorrow, everybody, there might be finally the end of the Affordable Care Act.